Welcome to Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom, the podcast that explores the hidden truths about health and healing. I'm Ethan Foster, your friendly, if somewhat understated, observer of the human condition.
And I'm Alara Skye, sharp mind, sharper tongue, and occasionally the lead troublemaker on this show. It's good to be back.
We have quite the story today, Alara. It's about milk, but this is not just any run-of-the-mill grocery aisle milk.
Yeah, this story comes pasteurized, but not homogenized, for your listening convenience.
Ouch, let's not scare off the audience with dairy puns just yet. They might curdle.
That's the beauty of raw humor, like raw milk. You either love it or you're absolutely terrified by it.
Speaking of raw milk, have you heard of Amos Miller? He's an Amish farmer who has been in a multi-year battle with state and federal regulators over his decision to sell raw milk across state lines.
Amish farmer, legal battles, the government and raw milk. All the ingredients for a riveting saga. It's like a suspense novel, but with cows.
The way it's all played out, you'd think Amos had a secret underground criminal enterprise. But what he's actually producing is unpasteurized milk. That's it.
Nutrient-dense milk, to be precise. According to people who really love raw milk, and yes, they're out there, they see it as liquid gold. It's got probiotics, enzymes, vitamins, and a natural composition that many folks claim is easier to digest.
Proponents also argue that pasteurization kills not only harmful bacteria, but beneficial nutrients, so the final product loses a lot of its oomph.
Exactly. Now, a lot of mainstream regulators have raised eyebrows at this practice, citing all sorts of health concerns, from E. coli to listeria. But this is where it gets interesting. The FDA itself acknowledges that if you buy raw milk for personal use, you're free to transport it across state lines.
So, if I enjoy a nice tall glass of raw milk in one state, I can technically drive it over to another state if I'm the one planning to consume it.
Yes, you're basically your own dairy mule. Just don't set up shop in the trunk of your car with a giant cooler, because that's frowned upon. Then again, we see folks carrying suspicious jugs in all sorts of situations, so it's not the strangest thing out there.
Right. But for farmers like Amos Miller, the critical sticking point is that he sells raw milk. And that's where federal law steps in with a big red sign that says, no raw milk sales across state lines.
He overcame that big sign, though. This new court decision in Pennsylvania upheld his right to keep selling his raw milk outside the state while the lawsuit against him continues. The Commonwealth Court basically said, hold on, this man can continue his business model until we iron out these constitutional questions.
So it's a partial victory, but the broader question isn't just about raw milk. It's about food freedom. Should people be able to buy foods directly from the producer, unprocessed, just as nature made them?
You've got it. And it's about more than just one farm. This is sort of a poster child case for traditional farming rights, private membership models, and good old-fashioned consumer freedom. The government came in and raided Amos Miller's farm last year, seizing over $100,000 worth of products.
That's a massive loss for a small farmer. Imagine how many cows you'd have to milk before you see that amount of product.
And the accusations revolve around selling outside the lines. But ironically, as you mentioned earlier, if an individual consumer drives over to Amos's farm, buys the milk, and then personally carries it across state lines, that's allowed.
It's the same milk, so the difference is simply in who's transporting it, or in how the sale is structured. It's a bit perplexing.
Yes, and Amish farmers are known for their traditional methods. No chemicals, sustainable practices, very meticulous about cleanliness. Amos Miller's customers consider the risk of contamination fairly low. They also say that the benefits of the natural enzymes and probiotics far outweigh the minimal risk.
Some might argue, if you trust your source and that farm is conscientious, what's the problem? But others emphasize the public health aspect, and that's the big tension.
The regulatory agencies basically hold that raw milk is a public health hazard. They caution us about E. coli, listeria, and the occasional heavy-handed cameo of salmonella if things go awry.
I get that. We obviously don't want to see people get sick. But if we can mitigate those risks, and a lot of small farms do just that, some folks want the choice.
Amos's supporters say yes, let's have the choice. That's the key to food freedom, being able to choose raw milk, or an unpasteurized cheese, or a grass-fed beef product, or organic produce without the interference of massive regulation that often seems to favor large-scale producers.
So, that's the raw milk angle, but apparently the regulators didn't stop at raw milk. They also clamped down on other products like grass-fed beef, produce, and anything else Amos's farm might have sold to his customers.
Which begs the question, why the special attention? For some perspective, conventional dairy farmers barely scrape by in many cases, whereas small farmers who sell directly to consumers can do a lot better financially. That, plus the big threat to corporate dairy, might be fueling the drama.
I love that you call it drama, because that's precisely what it feels like. A giant legal telenovela, except with overalls and barns.
Yes, all we need is the slow violin in the background. But we're not doing music cues, so let's just imagine it.
That's enough imagery for me. Now, the real heart of the matter is that the Commonwealth Court is saying there's a constitutional angle here, something about the Commerce Clause, which deals with interstate trade, and the question of whether the government can ban a centuries-old food altogether from crossing state lines.
And then there's the fundamental right to traditional foods. A lot of people talk about the cultural aspect. Amish communities have been doing this for generations. Who's to say we can't keep these traditions alive, especially when there are willing consumers?
Some folks might say you can do whatever you want, but keep it local. Don't cross the border. But the farm's customers live in multiple states, which complicates that idea. If there's demand out of state, that's still a real market that the farmer is simply trying to serve.
In the meantime, we have a partial ruling in favor of Amos Miller, who can continue selling his raw milk outside Pennsylvania. But the final showdown isn't over. The courts will be chewing on these constitutional questions in a full trial.
We'll see how that unfolds. It's a huge deal for other traditional farmers, though. If Amos Miller loses in the end, it would be a major blow to the broader raw milk movement, to small farmers who want to go direct to consumer, and to folks who prefer unprocessed foods.
But if he wins, it might open the floodgates for a wave of direct sales, private membership models, or co-ops. It's basically telling large-scale agriculture, hey, there's a new competitor in town, and they're milking the market in a very different way.
Now, let's not forget the actual health benefits that raw milk proponents celebrate. They point to lactase, the enzyme that helps digest lactose. Once you pasteurize milk, that enzyme is gone, so it can be tougher to digest.
Probiotics are the star players too, helpful bacteria for gut health. And then there's the argument that raw milk can strengthen immunity, maybe even reduce allergies or eczema if produced responsibly. People who grew up on raw dairy in some farming communities swear by it.
Of course, the conventional side says it's an unnecessary risk, but that's the crux of choice, right? If you know your farm, you trust your farmer, and the cows are healthy, many people are comfortable taking that small risk.
And as Amos Miller's supporters keep saying, over decades they have had virtually no complaints or major health outbreaks. Or, as some claim, zero, which is impressive, given how easily dairy can be mishandled.
Yes. Now, on the flip side, you get occasional big headlines about outbreaks of contamination even in processed foods or fast food chains. But those rarely provoke a government clampdown to the tune of $100,000 worth of products under detention.
Which is why we keep circling around this idea that small farmers are under an unfair regulatory microscope, while large-scale industrial operations, where many of these big outbreaks come from, never seem to face the same crippling consequences.
It's a typical David versus Goliath story, or should I say Dairy Goliath.
You should, and you did. Kudos, Ethan.
Now, for our listeners who might be intrigued by all this talk of nutrient-dense, unprocessed foods, we have a few ideas. You can look into your local laws, figure out who's allowed to sell what, because it varies drastically by state.
And if you want to support smaller farms, you can check out local membership-based models. Some call them farm clubs or herd share or cow share programs. It's basically a legal workaround in some places, letting you become a part owner of the cow so you can legally get its raw milk.
It's a membership-based arrangement, so you're not just a passive consumer, you're part of the farm in some symbolic way.
Exactly, and that's how a lot of these Amish farms survive. They offer these membership deals, so it's not exactly a commercial sale to the masses. It's a private exchange between the farmer and the membership.
Which is a nice demonstration of old-school community spirit, people literally saying, we want to partner with you to produce our food in a certain way. That's a huge shift from picking up a jug of milk in the supermarket from who knows where.
Speaking of who knows where, traceability can be pretty questionable in industrial agriculture. Ever try to trace exactly which farm your jug of milk came from in a giant consolidation system? Good luck.
So there's a strong know your farmer, know your food ethos behind all this. And if you support local farms, you're also supporting your local economy, building direct relationships, and possibly reducing your carbon footprint.
In theory, yes. Now, we also have the political angle. If you feel strongly about food freedom, you can always reach out to your representatives about reforms that help small farms, like the Processing Revival and Interstate Meat Exemption Act, known as the PRIME Act.
That act is basically designed to break down some of the red tape around small slaughterhouses, I believe, giving local producers more options to process and sell locally without having to jump through the same hoops as mega-scale producers.
Exactly. It's a big conversation. We're not going to solve it in a single podcast episode, but the fundamental question is, who gets to decide what's on your plate?
Is it the farmer, the consumer, the government, a little bit of each?
And that's precisely why Amos Miller's case is so important. It's more than raw milk. It's about balancing public health with individual rights and balancing the commerce of local farmers with the massive umbrella of federal regulations.
Let's pivot just a bit to highlight something else. The approach that some regulators took when they raided Miller's farm. Amos's legal team said the raid was executed with suspiciously little due process.
They reportedly seized $100,000 worth of food products, putting them under detention. And the argument is that they had no evidence of widespread contamination or complaints.
Which does feel a bit like using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut, or using a forklift to move a single crate of milk. Choose your metaphor.
It feeds into a narrative of overreach. Small farms ask, why are we subject to these heavy-handed tactics? Meanwhile, large processors can have major recalls, and they rarely see a dramatic raid or forced detention of products.
So, supporters of Amos Miller call it a lawless manner. They say the Department of Agriculture essentially used a search warrant with questionable claims. This is all to say, it might have been handled more diplomatically.
Which is often the concern with bureaucracies. They're not known for diplomacy. They're known for checklists, forms, and large men with serious expressions.
And typically, the small business can't match the legal firepower of big agencies. But in this case, Amos has garnered enough public support and found a strong legal advocate who's raised these constitutional points.
You have to admire that tenacity. A man with a farm, a dream, and a community behind him. He's continuing the fight in court, and so far, the court has let him keep selling raw milk in multiple states while the bigger trial goes on.
Sometimes these stories don't get national attention, but they hint at a broader food revolution. People want control. They want to know their options. And raw milk is symbolic of that.
Symbolic, yes. And also tangibly different from the standard product. People who are big fans will rave about the flavor. They say pasteurized milk can't compare.
I've heard it described as creamier, richer, and fresher. Then again, that might just be good marketing. But from personal anecdotes, raw milk fans really do talk about it like it's a gourmet treat.
Gourmet or not, in the end, it's about personal choice. Just like how you might choose a certain type of produce or a special cut of meat. People prefer foods close to nature, and that's what many small farms offer.
Should we talk about the different ways to support small farms, or have we milked that topic enough?
We can never milk a topic too much, Ethan. That's the point of a good conversation. But yes, let's recap a few ways to help folks who want to support food freedom.
Number 1, understand your local laws, because if you want raw milk, it might be legal in one state, gray area in another, and outright banned in a third.
Number 2, support local farms financially. If you like what they're doing, vote with your wallet. Whether it's a CSA, a herd share, or just visiting a nearby farm stand, that direct support keeps small farms in business.
Number 3, advocate for reforms that make sense. Some regulations are well-intentioned, but end up hurting small farms disproportionately. Being a voice for more balanced rules can go a long way.
Number 4, get involved in your community. There are local groups, co-ops, rallies, or farm tours where you can learn more and show your support for farmers like Amos.
And 5, if you choose to consume raw dairy, pick a high-quality source, one that's reputable and follows good cleanliness practices.
All pretty straightforward stuff. It's about education, engagement, and putting your money where your mouth is, literally.
Exactly. The reason these movements grow is because communities want them to. That's how you keep local traditions alive, whether it's Amish farmland, an urban co-op, or anything in between.
At the heart of all this is freedom. The freedom to say, I want to drink milk straight from the cow because my grandmother did it and she lived to 90. Or the freedom to say, no, I prefer store-bought pasteurized dairy. Thank you very much.
We should also note that this is part of a bigger conversation on sustaining traditional agriculture. Traditional farms have been overshadowed by industrial ones that produce enormous volumes, but maybe less nutritional density. Folks like Amos Miller stand for something else, a return to simpler methods.
And simpler methods do not mean sloppy methods. Often, small farms are extremely rigorous about cleanliness because one slip-up could wipe out their entire business. They don't want to risk losing their loyal customers.
That's an excellent point. So, is raw milk a perfect superfood, or is it just old-fashioned? I guess that depends on who you ask.
Some say it's both. But the bigger issue is whether we have the right to choose such foods without an army of officials storming the farm.
The new ruling in Pennsylvania gives hope. It says that Miller can continue his out-of-state sales, and it acknowledges the possibility that there are deeper constitutional rights here, like the right to buy and sell traditional foods.
We'll see if the final trial cements that or overturns it. But for now, people celebrating food freedom see it as a big win. That's a quote from Miller's attorney.
And maybe it's a sign that more farmers will have the courage to stand up for their practices, especially if they have a strong track record of safety and quality. It's a potential game changer for local, sustainable farming.
Absolutely. Local, sustainable farming just might be the next wave of health consciousness, if enough consumers choose it. We already see a surge in farm-to-table restaurants, artisan cheeses, specialty meats. Why not raw milk?
Why not indeed? Well, Ilara, we've covered quite a bit today. I'm thinking we should wrap up with a final thought. Whether you're a raw milk fan or you like your milk thoroughly pasteurized, at least we're now aware of the behind-the-scenes battle for the right to choose.
It's a battle that's bigger than a single jug of milk. It touches on commerce, tradition, health, and personal liberty. If you ever drink a glass of raw milk and think, wow, that's fresh, just remember, behind that freshness was a complex legal fight that paved the way.
You have an impressive way of making a dairy product sound heroic.
You should see my speech about kale. It would move you to tears.
Perhaps next time. This has been Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. Thanks for tuning into our conversation on Amos Miller, raw milk, and the broader question of food freedom.
We hope we churned up some interesting thoughts for you all. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay unprocessed whenever possible.
And stay out of trouble. That's what the disclaimers would say if we had them. But we're out of time. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.